Hey folks, before we dive in, thanks so much for listening. Go ahead and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts to help us be heard by more awesome listeners like yourself. Also, today's film features portrayals of violence and is entirely in Japanese. Just a heads up. Okay, here's the beep. Konnichiwa, everyone. Welcome to the Film Nuts Podcast. I'm your host, Taylor D. Adams. One of the things I'm really loving about this season is that we're diving into a wide variety of movies and TV shows. And today we expand our horizons even more with Akira Kurosawa's seminal film, Yojimbo. For the casual moviegoer, that name may not ring any bells, but it was Kurosawa's work on Yojimbo that would later inspire the movies that would define the era of the Western, like A Fistful of Dollars, Once Upon a Time in the West, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And for someone like today's guest who works in the film and television industry, Yojimbo is a groundbreaking masterpiece not only for Japanese cinema, but for movies across the globe. Nickolas Dimondi is a writer-director whose exposure to Kurosawa in college broadened his vision as to how much there was to learn about the cinematic arts. Nick and I discussed Yojimbo's influence, the benefits of Clubhouse, and how appreciating foreign language films can better your understanding of the world. We also go off on a brief Joker tangent. So, without further delay, here's Nickolas Dimondi talking about Yojimbo on the Film Nuts Podcast.
Yeah, my wife and I and the new baby are down here in Atlanta. So.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
So how's writing and dad life going for you?
The dad life is great. The little guy he's very little. So writing is, something that I work in when I can, because mom is working mostly full time. So, I mean, he's only an infant once. So I'm just kind of soaking that up. And, when he goes to bed at night, then I'll crank out a couple pages. But other than that, you're really just kind of taking the time to get him through the infant stages. And then when he can feed himself and walk around on his own, then it'll get a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So I've been noticing that you've been taking advantage of Clubhouse, which
yes,
I have an account. I listened to a couple of conversations. I've never participated in one. And honestly, sometimes I forget that it's on my phone. But talk to me about how you're kind of like using that platform, I guess.
Clubhouse, man, it's great. So for those who don't know, Clubhouse is essentially like a audio only chat room. Like way back in the day when you had like Yahoo Chat and you could go to the audio rooms, it's just like everybody piling into a room and you're all talking. It's moderated by people who can like run the room and mute other people and kick people out. Mm-hmm. So it's just really great for just open conversations with people on just the most random topics. And then it's kind of morphed into this sort of, I almost want to say like a public square. Like there's some rooms where creatives can hop on and it's totally quiet and someone's just playing music in the background and they say, you've got 20 minutes left on your writing sprint. We're all working together. And then you have other rooms where it's totally silent and you just have your profile up and people are just browsing profiles and seeing who they can connect with. And other times you're talking about Bitcoin, and then other times you're talking about taking mushrooms. So it's great.
A wide variety of programming, right?
It's incredibly varied. Yeah.
That's really cool, man. I think I chimed in for, or at least listened to one of the writing rooms you guys had going on. It seemed like a lot of good ideas being exchanged.
Yeah, and it's really the best part of all the best parts of social media because, communication, there's the 70-38-55 rule, which is, or 7-38-55 rule. So 7% of your communication is the actual content of what you're saying. 35% of your communication is the tone of your voice, and 55% of your communication is your body language. Yeah. So on Twitter, it's the worst because you're only getting 7%. You can maybe juice it up to 8% with a choice meme, but
sarcasm is hard.
Yeah, it's just the absolute worst form of communication. That's why Twitter is toxic and awful. But when you add in the voice element, you can really connect with people the way social media has been trying to for the past 20 years and failed. Clubhouse is just a great way to do that. So it's a very engaging and uplifting platform.
Yeah, from what I've seen, everything, I've joined a couple different conversations, just listening. It all seems, that's the one thing, is it's all positive. Like everybody's, exchanging of ideas.
Yeah.
There's, encouragement. Granted, there's probably a small hole somewhere where people are ragging on each other, but for the most part, it seems pretty constructive, I guess.
Yep. Pretty great.
So, let's talk about Yojimbo.
Yes, man.
Why did you want to talk about Yojimbo?
So Yojimbo it's a seminal film in that most directors and writers and actors, this movie will come up in their top 10, if not in their top 3 or 5. So many movies were influenced by Yojimbo. There are so many movie tropes that started with Yojimbo. It's just such and never mind the fact that the directing was groundbreaking at like, if you look at other movies made in the late 50s and early 60s, they're very much in that take away. They kind of the cinematic language rhymes with theater because they're still so close to that theatrical side of things, a very studio feel, like the backdrops are right there and the lighting is super harsh, and or it's film noir and it's like hyper stylized, everything looks like a painting, but then Yojimbo shows up and there's sweeping camera moves and it's like all outside, and yet it's also very ornately lit, and it's just an incredible mixture and nexus of the next level of filmmaking, and it jumps out off the screen at you.
So do you remember the first time you saw this movie?
Yes. My best friend had me over one night because me and him, we used to be avid pipe smokers. We would get like these like Sherlock Holmes pipes, and we would
This sounds like a classy ass hangout.
It was very classy. So.
Japanese foreign films and smoking pipes.
We would watch movies that we'd never watched before. We would drink bourbon and we would smoke pipes. And that's awesome. I know it was very classy. And I said, "Yeah, I've never seen a." He said, "Oh yeah, we're gonna watch this movie, Akira Kurosawa. I'm sure you know about him." I was like, "Nope, never heard of him." And this was like when I was in my early 20s. He was like, "What?" So he introduced me to Yojimbo, and he said, just take note. Tell me at the end of the movie who Sanjuro reminds you of. I'm like, okay. And Sanjuro is the main character.
Yeah.
And I watched the movie, and at the end of the movie, I'm like, he kind of feels like Indiana Jones. And my best friend said, yeah. And if you look and you read about how Indiana Jones was, how Steven Spielberg and George Lucas broke the story for Indiana Jones, they referenced Sanjuro as a direct influence on Indiana Jones.
Other than thinking about that reference, what did you take away from the movie the first time you watched it?
The takeaway was, well, as a viewer, I really let the story wash over me the first time. Like, it's just such a great Western, boiled down to it. And it's just a great story of, that, Sanjuro's kind of an anti-hero. and I just thoroughly enjoyed. Because it's a comedy, like it's a funny movie.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
I couldn't help but feel all of the reverberations from all the animes that I've watched. I'm like, wow, this is kind of like watching a live action anime. Yeah, I just sat there and I marinated in the world and I was just taking away all of the emotional beats. I was really focusing on the main characters and just enjoying the comedy. And then also taking mental notes of all of the historical things that I wasn't picking up on. I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I don't know why that's happening. Well, I don't know that part of Japanese culture, so I took a mental log and went back and educated myself on it. But I'd say that's just letting the story wash over me and enjoying the comedy and enjoying the Sanjuro character. That was the biggest thing the first time I watched it.
At that point, were you set on a career in filmmaking, or were you kind of up in the air and just a popcorn fan of movies? Like where was your state? It's because you said you saw it in your early 20s, so
Yeah,
nobody really knows what they want to do in their early 20s. Like we're all still trying to figure it out. But what was it like for you?
that's true. So when I was little, I always felt like I wanted to be in the movie business. From when I was like 10 or 12 years old, watching this like special effects show on the Discovery Channel. I forget, it was like
Movie magic.
Movie Magic. Yes,
Yep,
I watched
yep.
Movie Magic, and I'm like, I have to be in this business. I don't care what it is. I have to be in this business, and that's kind of been my through line throughout my whole life. In my when I went to college and stuff, I thought I was going to be a cinematographer. So at that point in my life, I'm like, oh, wow, I'm going to watch this movie again and really break down the cinematography. Wasn't really paying much attention to the directing. And then I figured out a few years later that I'm not a good cinematographer. I'm actually quite terrible at it. And it takes like, and I knew I figured out that I was bad at it because I worked with a friend of mine. His name is Chris Hannant, and he's an incredibly talented cinematographer. And it just came to him naturally. Boom, boom, setting up shots, perfect. Everything's perfect. For me to have like a quasi acceptable shot, it took 100% of my mind, and it was not natural. And I'm like, okay, well here's.
I get that, man. I'm not.
Yeah.
Somebody's like, hey, what would be good lighting for this? I was like, dude, you are asking the wrong person. Like, I can tell you a good angle. I can frame a shot like nobody's business, but lighting, oof. There are a lot more talented people than myself. I need to talk to them first.
Yeah. So that's where I was at, career-wise, mentally, thinking I was going to be a cinematographer at that point in my life.
Well, when you watch this movie, however many times you've watched this movie, do you appreciate it from a film-going perspective, or now that you are working in the film TV industry, do you have a different kind of appreciation for it, or do you look at it any differently?
I appreciate it more and more every time I watch it. I actually watched it just again recently, very recently, and every time I think I've seen it like 5 times now. Every time I watch it, I appreciate a new angle of the directing and of the story. So depending on my mood, I'll be very story focused, and then at other times I'll be more craft focused.
Yeah.
This time around I was more craft focused. I'm like, wow, like the way they have the interiors and the exteriors lit in the same scene, that must have been so difficult to do, shooting on the film stock that they were on, and like how did they just all of that, all the technical aspects, I was just gushing over. So yeah, I'd say it depends on my mood.
Has this piece inspired you at all?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this director, Akira Kurosawa, it's inspired me to just appreciate film history more, and appreciate historical context, and doing your homework. Because when you watch foreign films, as an American, you'll watch foreign films and like some things just seem like weird or bizarre and can take you out of the moment if you're constantly trying to apply an American cultural context to what you're watching. But films like this one, you think you know stuff about like samurai and whatnot, and then like some guy will come out, like the priest comes out at the end of the movie and he's banging this prayer drum, and like it looks like he's seeing a ghost, and like Sanjuro and all of them are kind of watching him, and then he like runs across the road and like stabs a bad guy and kills him. And you're like, okay, what the heck was that all about? That's so bizarre. So
this is the very end of the movie. You're like, yeah, wait, what?
Yeah, wait, why? It really makes you appreciate setting your cultural pretexts aside, and being okay with being uncomfortable and not knowing what exactly is going on, and then doing your due diligence to look that up, because you watch French films, you watch Polish films, Russian films, there's going to be things that are weird and off-putting, but if you are just like and then it kicks you out of the film, you're not getting it. But if you take a mental note and then you do a little research, you look it up, and you understand, oh, this is the context for why the priest went out and did that, and blah, 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 blah. It makes you a better film watcher, and essentially also a better filmmaker by association, because you're doing your due diligence to make your worlds, either when you're directing or writing, richer.
So when did you figure out the importance of viewing shows and movies more that were from outside of your culture than anything else? When did you kind of realize that was an important avenue to go down?
Gosh. I realized, so in college, I watched this movie that was made in the 70s, an animated film called Fantastic Planet.
Okay.
It's a French movie, and it's very weird. And that kind of set me off on this rabbit hole. I went down the rabbit hole on foreign films. Because Fantastic Planet was so jarring and so bizarre and so French, like 70s French. I'm like, what the hell is going on?
I imagine that's a trip.
It is a trippy movie.
Yeah.
And I'm not, like, I don't experiment with a lot of substances, and I can safely say you don't need any when you watch Fantastic Planet. So that movie, it was so bizarre and so jarring. And then I started asking other people, film friends of mine, okay, so what's your number one foreign film? What's this foreign film? What's this foreign film? They're like, oh, well, you got to watch, if you like thrillers, you got to watch Funny Games. And I watched Funny Games, like the original 1993 German one. And I was just like, what the heck am I watching?
That was bananas. That is a nuts movie.
Savage movie.
And even the remake is the one that came out probably 2008, 9, something like that, is nothing to shy away from either. It's got a lot of merits to it as well.
Yeah. With Naomi Watt. And so then I started just taking a deep dive on foreign films, and so that was the catalyst. I realized, okay, my cinematic language is my cinematic vocabulary is far more limited than I initially thought, and I need to get educated. So, and then when I watched Fantastic Planet, and then I watched Funny Games, and then it was just like everything after that. Then I was watching like the Dogma. What are those weird Swedish films that follow like the Dogma 95 or Dogma 91.
Not familiar with those. I have to look those up.
Yeah, it's like a filmmaking movement, a Dutch filmmaking movement that was like, you cannot have any lights, you cannot have a script. Is
Okay.
just really
All right.
hardcore, like very very stringent filmmaking
Right.
manifesto. Yeah,
It's almost like a 48-hour film challenge. Like like it limits what you're allowed to do, what you're allowed to use.
Yeah.
And I think those are important exercises for sure. I would emphasize the word exercises, but I know. But hey,
Yeah,
man,
I think after you've
I'm
done-
not. It could not be my bag, but still be very important to a lot of people that see it.
I know. I think, if you do more than one 48-hour film festival, I think there's something wrong with you, because they're not fun.
You're a masochist.
Like 20. There was like a 12-hour film festival one time. Like, guys, what are you trying to do? I mean, at that point, it's just
Yeah.
improv. You're just recording an improv
It's a long
session.
form improv. Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Ain't
you
nothing wrong
shoot
with
for
that.
6 hours and you edit for 6 hours, and I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that is interesting to me as far as like going down this foreign film discussion route is I feel like, unfortunately, for people those of us that live in the United States, I feel like we're not as almost aware of impact that foreign films can have. Because I feel like if we live in another country, like the standard, quote unquote standard, is like Hollywood. So people in other countries are constantly seeing what is made in America, but we're not seeing stuff made in other countries all that much. Outside of just like a film appreciation perspective, excuse me. How important do you think that is just for like almost the average moviegoer to see things that are made not within the confines of the United States, even though a lot of times our movies are filmed in Canada or South America or wherever,
So it's like, what's a good way? So you know how it's kind of cool these days to ask when you go to a nice restaurant, they may have it on the menu, but at the very least you ask your server, like, where is this steak from? Where is this chicken from? Where is this wine from? And you want to know. And then you'll find out and you're like, oh, that's really interesting. That's like your level 1 of why you should be interested in foreign films, because you could I like steak, but then also knowing, hey, this steak that I like, it came from Wyoming. Like, that's interesting. I may want to look up some Wyoming, ranchers or what have you. And the language of film, especially when you're talking about directors that draw from the history of film, it's just woven into so many things that you've seen that you don't know about. So then you're kind of getting in on the subtext of things, and you can see all these homages and these nods to other films, and it makes the viewing experience richer. So like when you go to another restaurant and they say, oh yeah, we have all of our steak from Wyoming, you're like, I love steaks from Wyoming. And it just makes the restaurant experience that much richer. So that's like the base level of why you should. I think that's like level number 1. It just makes film watching richer.
I gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I like that analogy. That's pretty good. That's a new one. I haven't heard that one, but that's good. Regarding kind of this movie, Yojimbo's influence on films made since 1961 when this thing came out. How do you think that it has affected movies that came out after it? And other than the general sense of it did.
Yeah. So this film influenced a lot of directors that came up during the what they call the film school generation. Scorsese and Coppola and those guys, Spielberg, as well. So, and that film school generation of directors that were making films in the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s, they and the late 60s, they set the tone for they changed filmmaking and movie going forever. So they completely severed the leaning on theatrical. And when I say theatrical, I mean the theater, because that's where film came from. They came from the theater. And for up until basically the 60s, movies were very, very theater-esque. You could almost take any movie and like not have a camera and just have the performers doing the movie. In front of a stage and a live audience. But after the 60s and the late 60s, you couldn't do that anymore. Like, you cannot do Star Wars in front of a live audience. It will not
not a
work.
stage play.
Yeah. So that's the number one way that it changed everything. It changed the pacing of movies. It changed how movies were, how actors were directed on camera. It changed scoring. It changed. It advanced the technology of what a camera could do and what a camera was expected to do. So before then, it was the camera's there and it's this giant thing, and you're just going to throw on like as much light as the sun, or you're going to cast these like incredibly harsh shadows or whatever if you're doing film noir, and that's the movie. But Yojimbo was, hey, I'm going to take the camera, I'm going to put it on these rails, and it's got to move around, and we got to light these sets for like more than looking at it at a 90 degree angle and whatever. And we're going to really change the altitude and of the camera, and the actors have to be aware of that, and we're going to be hiring a bunch of extras, right? Like all these things. And the guy did it for not that Kurosawa did it for not that much money, and it made $1 gazillion.
That's a technical
It's the technical term. It made
how many
Dogecoins?
How many Dogecoins is that? Like, what's the conversion rate on that?
Trillions. Adjusted for inflation, this movie made $130 million.
Ooh, man.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And no one really knew Kurosawa in the States before this, and this was like. This was such a titanic shift. It changed the way Westerns were shot forever. Yeah. And then it kind of bled over into the other genres.
Yeah, that whole like samurai movie subgenre into the Western genre, it almost became cyclical at some point as far as like the homages and the references. Like Westerns inspired Yojimbo, and then Yojimbo inspired like all the Clint Eastwood movies, pretty much.
Just like, all the spaghetti westerns, like Sergio Leone, and yeah,
it's wild how that does that. I was watching a video essay shortly before we started this chat on just kind of how Kurosawa is known for using a lot of movement within his shots. And one of the things that drives me insane now is like watching anything that comes out kind of present day, and the camera's just like moving for no reason. Yeah. And at the risk of sounding like the old guy telling people to get off my lawn, but like, I kind of don't understand. I mean, I do understand this whole thing of like movement for the sake of movement is like this whole preconceived notion that we need stimuli. We need to see something moving. We need to see something interesting at all times, even if it's not there for a particular purpose. Do you feel that there might be a movement coming soon? Because there's like a lot of film movements that are either new or just rehashes of stuff that's already been done for the sake of just cyclical style. Do you feel like there's a movement coming where we'll get back to more modern movies having more purpose with a lot of the details around what is made?
I think yes, I think the general movie-going audience they're always getting more savvy in what they consume. For instance, there will always be people that want to watch Fast and Furious, and that want to watch, like I'll just call it Bayhem, because
Yeah.
it's incredibly kinetic and there's something always going on.
Yeah.
And some people just love that. And only Michael Bay and a few other directors can do that and deliver that. But if you look at a movie like The Joker, that came out of nowhere and no one wanted to make it, and no one thought that this director would direct it, and no one thought that Joaquin Phoenix would act in it. And that is a movie with a lot of intentionality and a lot of locked off shots and a lot of purpose, and it resonated with people. Not just the story, but the style of how it was presented. It was the anti comic book movie, right? Like it was very much. It was very, very Spike Lee in a sense. Like it was like Spike Lee would never do a comic book movie, but this was a very gritty, but not gritty for the sake of like just being gritty and dark. It was an incredibly moving film that came out of nowhere and people resonated with it. And you're seeing that more and more these days where, okay, you don't have to coddle the audience and treat them like they're goldfish. They can take dramatic pauses. They can absorb and appreciate a more methodical approach to storytelling. So I think that is coming around. Just and the proof is in the pudding. You take what you're doing right here with a podcast. People like long form conversations. Yeah. They like to sit and chew on the content, and they're over the talking heads and the rapid fire blah blah blah, and they want something that they can sit down with and bond with.
Do you think, going back to Joker, that's actually interesting point, because I just watched
Peter Berg did Joker, right?
Todd Phillips did Joker.
Oh, Todd Phillips, my bad.
Yeah. Going back to that, because I actually watched Joker for the first time maybe about a month ago. I'd never seen it. I enjoyed it. I thought it was really well done. I don't think it like hit me as hard as a lot of other people did, but I did like appreciate what went into it. And at the risk of going off topic from what we're talking about, like, do you think that I'll take the devil's advocate side and say, do you think that movie was successful because it was well crafted, or because it was Joker? Like, it was an already existing like piece of IP that people wanted to get into, and people were still remembering Heath Ledger as like the Joker. So we're always looking for more Joker in a way, in whatever form. I mean, it could be a combination of both, but what do you think about that?
So initially the vibes like on the internets was more of an eye roll when they heard about it. They're like, what, Todd Phillips, like the guy who did The Hangover, is making a Joker movie? Like, this
you're talking about reactions to like just the announcement of it.
Yes. That's what that. So initially people were like, okay, this is just a blatant cash grab and it's gonna suck. But then when the trailer dropped and we were like, oh, okay, this is new and
this is different. Yeah.
And that goes to the power of, if you got a juicy trailer, people are gonna see your movie at least one time.
Yeah.
But then when it came out, it was very much, it was 2019, and there was a lot of anxiety in the world. This was before the pandemic.
Yeah.
There was already a lot of anxiety, just like, political tensions were just at, a fever pitch. There was a lot of discussions about mental health going on. So the timing of the movie is what really, if this movie would have come out in like 2005, no one would have watched it. Because they all wanted like feel good movies, and the tone would be completely off. Even though you could say that there is like a little bit of a Fight Club tone to this movie. Yeah. But yeah, like the timing of the movie was perfect. So I think that's why it resonated with so many people. I think if it came out now, people would not want to watch it.
Yeah, no, it's so crazy how, timing is everything.
Yeah.
Honestly, like if you release something out now, it could be great. If it comes out a year from now or even 6 months from now, it could be in a completely different social environment that something could be hit or miss.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Nick. I appreciate you hopping on. Hope you and the family are doing well.
We are doing great, Taylor. This has been so fun. You have fun doing more of these. I want to see more of these. I want to hear more of these. You're doing a great job.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you later.
All right, bye.
I think my favorite part of our conversation was Nick's analogy about how film is food. If you try it and like it, you may want to know more about where it comes from. And that's a quick indulgence of curiosity that can lead to us not only watching and eating things we may not know much about, but maybe widen our cultural net as a whole to better understand each other. So go check out Yojimbo. It's streaming now on HBO Max. I can't thank Nick enough for being on today, and I can't thank you enough for listening. So be sure to subscribe to keep up to date with all of our episodes, and please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts to help spread the word. If you want to get in touch with us, hit us up on Twitter at FilmNutsPodcast or email hello@filmnutspodcast.com. Okay, that's all, folks. I've learned saying sayonara sounds too final, so I'll go with see you later instead. Hopefully I don't butcher this pronunciation. Jane.